For now, though, we are going to be sliding across virtually anyways to discuss exactly what Ms. Ford would have mentioned, the crime symposium and the impacts thereof, making certain that we equip people with more information on how they themselves can perhaps be inspired to create programs much like this. Right, Ruckus?
Definitely. This morning we'll be chatting with strategic security consultant and regional security expert, Mr. Garvin Heerah, because we're chatting about the impact and the importance of the regional symposium recently held on crime and violence. Good morning to you, Mr. Heerah.
Hi, morning, Ruckus. Morning to the team. And again, a very special morning to Councillor Young and Ms. Ford, and we applaud the initiative. We have our ears on the ground, and you all are doing a great job, and hopefully it will spread out into some of the other areas as you perfect your pilot project. So a job well done.
Yeah, man, most definitely. Tell me, in your opinion, what is the impact and the importance, rather? Let's start with the importance of that symposium that was held last week.
Yeah. You see, now there have been a lot of talk going around, and people are using the opportunity as platforms and soapboxes to air and to vent and to say a lot of stuff. But we have to understand that we have been able, based on the decision collaboratively of our leaders in the region, to recognize that crime and criminality and the impact on our countries, our economy of our countries, or the socio-economic aspect on the people has become critical, a crisis. So we got all of the decision makers in the room to be able to start discussing how do we structure an implementation towards this issue. And I think that is what people need to understand, that we came into the room, there was a discussion, there was a highlight, there were presentations, and now, most importantly, as we sit back, there has to be now a very strong, structured implementation so that we can begin expanding on some of the issues that Councillor Young would have talked about, but reaching some of the issues on the ground here, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, Jamaica, to be able to have a standardized approach, because it's the same threat, it's the same risk as you would have seen in all of the presentations. Everybody's facing more or less the same problem. And we have a sort of linkage in our culture. So getting the leaders in the room was a good step in the right direction. And what is advised now, based on impact and importance, is that we move assiduously towards the implementation phase and rollout phase.
All right, so I'm hearing you, and I agree with you 100%. How long do we, as a population then, or as a Caribbean, how long do we look forward to waiting for the implementation? How long do we wait to see the impact that it's going to have long term? Like, give me an average, or how we can expect to see the actual change.
Well, when you have this sort of politically charged atmosphere, as we did for the last 2 days at the symposium, I am saying, as we say in the military, concurrently, simultaneously, parallel, on the side of, there should have been some sidebars that were already discussing, raising some stones, opening some files, and sort of perfecting how do we move forward. For every initiative that was designed and presented, there should have been sidebars for implementation, so we wouldn't have to do what you're saying. Wait, okay, so let's wait. How long are we going to wait here? It's going to be 3 months, bodies are still falling, guns are still coming, drugs are still being transshipped. How long are we going to wait? Homes are still being invaded. So it should not be a gap and a wait. There should have been, for instance, a very strong presentation to the close in 1 month's time, in 2 months' time, or soon, within the first quarter, second quarter, we should be moving to the implementation stage. I think it is very good when we have that sort of business continuity of the communication. So applause to the symposium, very good. But I think that we should have been told something about implementation and not have to wait and speculate. So hopefully very soon we will have some sort of presentation, some sort of conference, some sort of joint Caribbean voice that is going to say there will be now an implementation symposium as to treat and to deal with some of the front burner priority items that were highlighted.
All right, I hear you. I'm not sure if we need another symposium for it, or we just need the information to be shared. But I wanted to get
symposium, but it doesn't have to be symposium, correct?
Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion on the quote by the Prime Minister of Jamaica. He said that violence and its use in crime is a threat to our democracy.
Yes. And we have to understand what Prime Minister Holness was actually saying. Now, he is not speaking, as some people might have misinterpreted, when he went into a threat to our democracy, a threat to a political stability or whatever. democracy deals with the people. That's the underpinning, that's the foundation. We are led by a democracy. We are led by a democratic process. But the underpinning of all of that is people. And when our people are threatened, when our people are victims, when our people seem to have their hands in the air and they are crying out for a response from the democratically voted, appointed government, it's a threat to how we do business. And it's not so much as an overthrow, it's not so much as a revolution to our democracy, it is a threat towards the stability of our people. And I think this is what he was leading to, that our people are crying out, and the process by which we govern is being threatened because crime and violence has now infiltrated the normal routine, the survivability, as the Prime Minister of Barbados would have alluded to some extent. But we have to recognize now it is our survivability, because our people are under threat based on the crime and violence infiltrating their routines, their economy, their properties, their safety, their security, their children, the educational system in our schools, the violence in our schools. It's affecting that. So some key pillars in our democracy are being threatened, are being chipped at based on the crime and the violence and the infiltration of the minds of the criminals, the young minds especially.
You know, Mr. Heerah, we're chatting about the symposium which took place on crime and violence in particular, right? And I feel like yesterday we were able to separate those two things, because there's crime and then there's violent crime, right? But before we get into more details on that, I want you to comment on this quote taken from the Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. She said the issue of violence is one that is critical to our collective survival as a region. So we went from democracy and now we're talking about the entire region.
Yeah.
Comments?
Well, it's linked. Yeah? It's linked because Prime Minister's Holiness, his quote was really, as for a Caribbean state, a Caribbean region, a joint, what I'll call that linkage of islands. And even with Prime Minister Mottley's statement, survival within the region, we have to recognize that the crime has evolved incrementally. And we have, what she's really saying is that we now have to ensure that we shift the narrative incrementally to treat with this new state of crime that has gone into violence, because there's now violence associated with the crime. It's not like a normal robbery where your goods and services, your goods are taken, and someone leaves. They want to shoot you, they want to stab you, they want to rape you, they want to burn your house, as we're seeing in some areas. There's a certain element of violence. What has happened to the peaceful Caribbean state, and let's call all our islands a state, with this onset of violence? And she was leading towards some of the issues that are coming in, some of the cultures that we are inheriting, that we are copycatting and mimicking, especially with the video games, especially with what seems to be now the ideology of our youth and the music. You heard all of these things being spoken about. It is contributing towards our survival. We are no longer surviving healthily. That is what is being said. We are surviving unhealthily, and that is where there's an unhealth. Remember, it's a public health issue. That was the platform of the discussion. So we are not healthy when we look at it with regard to how the violence has now become almost pandemic within the region. That is where she's heading. The survivability has now been, we have been invaded by the violence and the crime based on what has been happening in the outer system that has now brought onto our shores within the Caribbean region.
So, Mr. Heerah, granted that you would have specifically underscored the importance, or mentioned even within our school system, the symposium would have had many strategies ruled out for a number of facets within the society. We need to get a clear sense of what is specific to the next generation. And I know that you said that there can't be an exact timeline as to when we can expect that, but can you indicate in the most layman way some of the things that we can look forward to for the next generation, as we are now treating this as a mental health threat, a public health threat, and our next generation ensures our survivability?
Yeah, I'm not dismissing mental health, because the public health has mental health issues, and yes, it's a mental. People are psychologically affected. So hold on to that. Don't lose that.
A valid mistake.
Yeah, no, it's not a mistake. Actually, it's a great point. But what I was saying is not that we're not too sure when we should have a, don't look at it that way, like, it's up in arms. What's going to happen next? I think our voices, and I applaud the station this morning, the media house, to raise the conversation so that the decision makers are recognizing, wait a minute, the next step, guys, we need to promote the next step. We need to present the next step. The country, the citizens, the Caribbean needs to hear the next step. And I'm not too sure whether education or our educational issues, the challenges, the threats, the risks that are within our system have been highlighted with enough oomph, with enough power, with enough muscle in the symposium. Because when people hear education, immediately they will go to the institutions, to the schools and our curriculums and what is being taught and not taught and what is being passed on as education and the stages and levels that we have. No, education is that sort of awareness for our citizens. That's where we are. How do we educate our people? How do we pronounce rights and wrongs, protocols, best practices? Because in a public health situation, you want your people to be doing the right thing to remain safe. So we're taking that concept and going forward. And I'm saying regarding our education, I think more needs to be done along the lines of public awareness and standardization of the language being used. Our culture, how can we encourage culture and our arts and our music and some of our artists to be part of this education? And more importantly, within the institutions, our educational institutions, how can we have public awareness programs that will drive hard against, like we had the Say No to Drugs and the Charlie Don't Litter, that type of stuff? How can we start to promote that positivity amongst our school system? Because we're seeing the violence, we're hearing something that is existing in schools, taxing and bullying in all of the schools. But yet still, on civil streets, we have members of the protective services before the court, so we can't really talk much about that, on the same issue of demanding money from business places. We have a crime that has risen where people are actually extorting money from business places under intimidation and violence. Those same criminals doing that, the 21-year-olds and the 19s and the 18-year-olds, if you backtrack 5-6 years, we're in school and we're doing the same thing and have now graduated. So they're seeing it as a corridor for easy money. What has made the young man move towards that rather than what Councillor Young and they were talking about, instilling a certain amount of positive career-based training and development of individuals? That's where that whole education issue has to be addressed. And I thought the symposium should have spent some time in that direction, and hopefully the implementation phase will drill into it so that we can start to prepare the next generation, just as you asked.
No, Mr. Heerah, I do understand. I mean, I feel your passion and I appreciate it very much. And I thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing some of this information. I feel like we could continue this conversation for a whole another half an hour easily. Unfortunately, though, we're out of time. And I want to thank you again for joining us this morning and for sharing your thoughts. And I hope that we can have you back in to continue the conversation, because I think we still have a lot to unpack, especially relating to the symposium and how we go forward. So thank you very much.
And a job well done, and I applaud you guys for starting the conversation. I look forward for part 2 of our conversation.
Yeah, man. Take care. Enjoy your day. That's Garvin Heerah, the strategic security consultant and regional security expert, just sharing his thoughts on the impact and the importance of the regional symposium on crime and violence held last week at the Hyatt with all the heads of CARICOM, all the leaders of the CARICOM Islands. And, we look forward to seeing implementation as we go forward. We'll take a quick break and we come back with more inside the Now Morning Show. Stick around.